We will light our chalice now. We have Rachel Hollander, who's one of our newest members. Oh, you got some cheers already. Rachel has moved here last summer to help take care of her parents. She's a primary care physician, but she's kind of taking that on the back burner right now, taking some time off, I guess. She's likes to hike, and she's a rollerblader. So we will have our lighting of the chalice, Rachel.
I light this chalice with these words. Open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Open our minds to learn what is true. Open our hearts to love one another. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant, which you will find printed in your service, saying, Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Thank you, Rachel. And I know a lot of you are very excited about his presence here today. Rev Teitel is a Unitarian Universalist minister. We don't have that very often in the pulpit here. A poet and a lapsed punk rocker. And he serves as the minister at the church on the river in Memphis. I know a lot of you have been there and have even heard him and are very excited about his being here today. Sam has previously served on the congregational staffs of Unitarian Universalist churches in Boston and Wayland, Massachusetts. He holds a Master's of Divinity and a Master's of Arts from Andover Newton Theological School. I'm not sure how he ended up in the South. You'll get over it. Othman Smith Community Congregational Preaching, he was the recipient of the Othman Smith Community Congregational Preaching Award. In 2019, he won the grand prize, I love this, at the Preachers Fight Club storytelling event. I've really had so much, Rev Teitel and I have been emailing and working on this service for over 3 months, I guess, and it's fun now to actually meet him, and I'm just really looking forward to the service. But in his spare time, he loves checking out new restaurants and record stores in Memphis. And we got to meet his wife, Sandra, and I learned this morning that she is also a minister. And Gideon, their son, who is way beyond his years. He's 1.5, but going on 40. And their Jack Russell Terrier, Tommy, I don't believe could make it here today.
Little Rock, Arkansas. It is so wonderful to see you. It's so wonderful to be here. My name is Sam. I'm from Memphis. I serve at our Unitarian Universalist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, the Church of the River. It is so great to be with you all this morning, and I'm so grateful to you for welcoming me and my family into your space, and to Debbie, who has been a superhero dealing with me for months, and to everyone who has spoken, who has made this worship service happen. I love how many voices are a part of your service. I love that your service comes up out of your community in such an amazing way. And what's great about the reading and then the sermon being right next to each other is I can kind of do what I want with the time that I have. So we're going to do my patented, but you're welcome to use it, Bible story in Unitarian Universalist Church disclaimer, which is just to say that I know where I am. I have been a Unitarian Universalist for my entire life. I didn't have much to do with the Bible till I got to seminary. But I like bringing up Bible stories in UU churches and preaching about them. And I do it for two big reasons. The first is that our tradition came out of biblical traditions. So this book is a part of our story. It's a part of who we are. And we have a right to it. And the second reason is that because we have a right to this story and a right to own this story, what we say it means is not any less valid than what anyone else says that it means. And that means that the people who have used these narratives to cause harm, they don't get to have the final word, that we also have a right to participate in that conversation and to take these stories and make them work for us, and to love them and to work with them and to wrestle with them. And I like to pick the tough stories, pick the ones that we don't hear about a whole lot, because that's usually where the good stuff is. So this is from the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 18 through 28. The sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine and became drunk, and he lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it both on their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. May God make space for Japheth, and let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So, the great flood is over. God has flooded the world. The book of Genesis, and understand this is a long time ago when people's understanding of our world was different. So Genesis describes the sky as being held up by sort of a barrier or a bubble. It's often translated as a vault. And so the vault sometimes has holes in it, and that's rain. And so the flood is basically God ripping down the sky vault. So God rips down the sky barrier and everything floods, and Noah has built his ark and put 2 of each animal on board, and he has ridden out the flood and landed on top of the mountain and let all of the animals in pairs off of the boat. And then Noah has had that moment. And it's a moment that many of us have had when we've been working on a huge project for a long time, and it's finally finished. And you think, well, so that happened. Now what do I do? And so Noah plants a vineyard, the very first vineyard, and he makes the first ever wine, and Noah gets drunk and passes out naked in his tent. And his son Ham looks into the tent, and Ham sees his father Noah in this precarious state, and he walks out and he tells his 2 brothers, Shem and Japheth, "Hey, so Dad is passed out naked in the tent. What do you think we should, do?" And Shem and Japheth pick up a piece of cloth between the 2 of them, and they walk backwards into the tent, and they lay the cloth over Noah's body to cover him up. But, because they walked backwards, they didn't see Noah naked. So Noah eventually wakes up and realizes what has happened and loses his cool. And he berates his son Ham, who first found him there and saw him and told people. And he says that Ham's son Canaan will be cursed, and that Canaan's children will be forever subordinate to Shem and Japheth's children. And Ham and Canaan slink away in disgrace. I remember reading this story for the first time and thinking, wait, what? This is part of the story, like the story of Noah, like the guy with the boat and the animals, like this is how that ends? And yeah, this is totally how that ends. This is one of those Bible stories that people like to ignore. Or if they don't ignore it, they try to justify it. And as is so often the case with these justifications, they are sometimes more disturbing than the text itself. When I was in my final year of seminary, our school was dealing with a very serious incident of clerical misconduct on part of some of the school's most senior leadership. And a guest preacher from Cambridge came into our chapel service the next week, and he preached about this story, and he said, we need to talk about what to do when righteous men do unrighteous things. And he said, it's a mistake when we see someone in Noah's position to do what Ham did and tell everybody, and how we should instead be like Shem and Japheth and cover the person up and look away as much as possible, and say, well, at some point you'll be passed out naked in a tent, and you have to rely on people to cover you. And so it's an interesting take, but do you notice how it also puts zero responsibility on Noah for how he behaved before and after Ham found him? I've heard the explanation that Noah is traumatized, right? That this is a story about somebody who has seen unbelievably horrible things and is now coping with their trauma by abusing alcohol and taking their anger out on their children. And Noah has seen horrible things. Noah has just watched the entire world drown. That's a horrible thing. And it should be acknowledged as a horrible thing, right? Like, we teach this story to children, like, a lot. Mostly because it makes really good toys, right? I mean, kids love I have a 2-year-old. Kids love toy boats. Kids love toy animals. So a toy boat full of toy animals is a slam dunk. But when you treat it as a fun kid story, you can forget how violent the story is, right? I mean, the whole world dies. The Quran has a version of the story in it. The Quran has a lot of stories in it that a person who is familiar with the Bible would recognize. And the version of the story that's in the Quran has a part that the biblical version doesn't have. In the Quran, Noah has a 4th son. And when the rain that will eventually flood the world begins, Noah's 4th son believes that if he just climbs to the top of a mountain, that the flood can't reach him there. And so there's this extra scene where the water is rising higher and the sun is on top of a mountain and the storm is raging all around them, and Noah is trying to talk his son onto the ark. And the son is on the mountain insisting that he'll be fine, and eventually he drowns, and it's heartbreaking. And it's profound, right? This idea that Noah's son can't let go of the world that he knew, even as that world is clearly being washed away. He clings to its last remnant, unable to accept the reality of what's happening around him. And it makes the story a lot more interesting, right? Like, the English major in me can't help but notice that the Old Testament doesn't have a whole lot in the way of emotional character development. So this additional story, it gives some really interesting conflict and some motivation for the characters, right? This is like where if I was the editor of the Bible, I would say, so this is good stuff, but have you read the Quran? Because it takes it to some deeper places. But when it comes to explaining the story of Noah and his tent, the explanation that has always worked best for me is that this is a story about generations of fathers and sons. A few years ago, somebody who listens to my congregation's podcast sent me an email. In the email, she talks about how, she said, well, God gets angry and causes the flood, which causes so much horrible destruction. She said it's really comforting to her to know that even God gets angry and does things that God ends up regretting, right? And God does acknowledge after the flood that it was a mistake. So I read the email and I thought, that's also what Noah did. Right? Noah has this abusive, harmful eruption towards his children, at least in part because that is the kind of parenting that has been modeled for him. Right? I myself don't see God as being male. I don't see God as a being who has gender. But Noah, in his religious beliefs, sees God as a father. Right? And Noah watched this father get angry and flood the world and harm his children. And so when he gets angry, he harms his own children. So this is a story about cycles of abuse. It's a story about this idea that manhood and fatherhood are synonymous with domination and with violence. And it's a story about everything that goes so horribly wrong when we perpetuate that belief and how these things are passed down through generations. 4 generations just in the story, right? God to Noah to Ham to Canaan. Sometimes wonder about Ham and Canaan walking away from Noah out into the world. I wonder how they treated each other. I wonder if they were able to treat each other differently from what had been modeled for them. I wonder how they treated other people. I wonder how Canaan treated his children, particularly his sons. And I wonder about Noah's 2 other sons, Shem and Japheth, who had also grown up witnessing this violent behavior. One time it was Ham, next time it could be one of them. I wonder how they treated their children, how all of this perpetuated itself. I've been thinking about this lately and about how our society's ideas about gender dictate our behavior and how our distorted ideas about masculinity, our broken model of how men should behave, gets passed down through generations. As men, we are taught as we grow that to be a real man is to be dominating. It is to be aggressive and unquestionable. We may not have heard this in our homes growing up, right? My father is one of the gentlest and kindest people you could ever hope to meet, but I also grew up in the world, right? None of us are immune to the ways in which these cultural ideas get into our heads and into our hearts. A couple months ago, I read this really interesting article about how men in American society don't really touch each other. And so if we are not in a romantic relationship, we can go months without touching anybody at all. And right, because when you meet another man, where's David? David? Yeah, come here. Can you all still hear me? Because when you meet another man, what do? You glare directly into each other's eyes and you try to break each other's hands. That's it. And that is genuinely psychologically damaging to us. As human beings, we need more contact than that. And one of the things that it does is it disconnects us and it makes it easier for us to hurt each other. So I sent my friend Frank a text message and I said, I read this really interesting article about how men should touch each other more. And I was going to forward it to you. And then I thought it might be weird if I sent you an article about men touching each other, which I guess kind of proves the article's point. To Frank's credit, he replied that he would love to read the article, but I could also just whisper to him about it while we hugged each other. And so this is something for all of us to work on. Just as a side note, my wife, the Reverend Sandra Summers, right there, and I were talking, and I said, so, the people in the congregation who are not men, who are women, or who are non-binary, like the only real instructions in the sermon are for the men? Like, do you think they'll be bummed out that there's no, instructions for them? And she said, no, they will be perfectly happy to spend one morning of their lives without listening to a man telling them what to do. For what it's worth. And so this is important to talk about, and it's important to talk about now of all times. Look at our world. Look at all that is going on. Think of all the men in our society who feel so unable to live up to a standard of machismo that has been set for them that they end up becoming violent. I think about not just physical violence, but my home state of Tennessee just passed some pretty atrocious laws. That is violence. That is an act of legislative violence. Yeah. I think about all the times that violence gets dismissed as boys being boys. It's locker room talk. Or it is, as that guest preacher in my seminary said, just the unrighteous things that righteous men do. And this behavior, it is not always immediately perceptible to people who don't know to look for it, especially to men who don't realize that they're doing it. I think about all of the men who have told my wife that they struggle to see her as being their minister because she could be their daughter. You know, and it's not a gender thing, it's an age thing. And you know what's so weird? A woman my mother's age has never told me that she can't picture me as being her minister because I could be her son. It has never happened. Not once. So many of the biggest problems in our world are caused by men who cannot let go of the role that they feel they must play. Men who would rather cause hurt and destruction than accept that the world is moving away from a model in which a man has to be an unquestionable patriarch who does not reveal his feelings, who does not apologize and admit that he should not have been passed out drunk in the tent to begin with, and who responds to anybody questioning his behavior with curses and with violence. As our world has been blessed with an increasingly enlightened ideas about gender and gender equality and breaking down our gender binary that hurts all of us, so many men have behaved like Noah's fourth son in the Quran and have found the last little pieces that they can find of the world as they once understood it and are clinging on for dear life, screaming about how right they know they are, even as the water around them gets higher and higher. When you look at all of this, you see what happens when men continue to handle our grief and our trauma only by cursing each other and our world, doing damage that will impact future generations like Noah cursing his grandson Canaan. And it is on all of us men who are trying to work towards a better world to move through this world and through our lives, modeling a kind of manhood that is compassionate and kind, demonstrating to the young people who are watching us, and young people are always, always, always watching us, that there is another way. It is on all of us men when one of us has decided to climb up to the top of a mountain to hold onto the last little piece that he has of the world as he believes it once was, to deny the change that is happening around him. It is on us men to say to him, this is not how it has to be. There is another way for you. There is another way for all of us. Get on the boat. We support you. We care about you. You are not cursed and you are not alone. Beloved, get on the boat. The water is rising fast. Amen.
Please remain standing as we say our closing words in unison that are printed in your order of service. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. And Rachel will now extinguish our chalice. And we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen, blessed be, and namaste. And I would like to invite everyone to our veggie potluck after the service, and also Rev Teitel will be leading a discussion on the UUA's Article 2. So all are welcome, and go in peace. Thank you.